The Chicago Bulls still have their 15th roster spot open. And while there have been recent rumors about Ben Mathurin and some other things that the Bulls could do with it, I want to talk about why the Chicago Bulls could very well leave that roster spot open. And while it may sound boring, it could actually add to the flexibility that the Bulls are hoping to go into the second tax apron with. Plus, we have a rumor that the Orlando Magic could have to look to trade Paolo Banchero. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And if the Bulls, if we see the Orlando Magic going into a second tax apron swing and they look to move either Franz or Paolo Banchero, should the Chicago Bulls be interested in that? We're going to talk about all that plus more right after this. What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go and get into this content for today. And I want to start off with this one. Ben Mathurin rumors are starting to die off some, right? We heard that from Mark Stein, the Chicago Bulls' interest in Ben Mathurin may have been a bit overstated, and this typically happens around this time of year, is that a team could have some legitimate interest in the player, but of course, because the news cycle and things like that, it gets reported as kind of a bigger kind of possibility than what it was, right? And that's why, in talking about it here, we talked about like the reality of it, right? You have to either sign and trade Isaac Okoro. The Patrick Williams sign and trade, it would leave Ben Mathurin having to get paid at least $21 million. I don't think that that's going to happen. But I do think this, it doesn't completely eliminate Ben Mathurin as a possibility, whether it's now in this offseason or it goes into next offseason if he does take the qualifying offer. But the thing that you're hearing from this overall is that the Bulls right now are not pushing towards an imminent sign and trade offer towards Ben Mathurin or anything else, because the key thing that Bryson Graham is looking at going into the season is flexibility. Now, the Ben Mathurin smoke may still matter, right? But every rumor isn't going to turn into a transaction, and that's perfectly fine. Over the last couple of days, people have talked about what Ben Mathurin could be and his benefits, his negatives, and all that type of stuff. It's perfectly fine, right? Like, I love the dialogue. I do love that there do seem to be, and I've been in this job for a long time now. It seems to be a lot of Bulls fans that have been very kind of negative and down on this team that have been a lot more positive here recently, right? A lot more kind of excited about what this team could be, and we'll see. Right now, Ben Mathurin as a player, I'll say this to go into it long term. Like, if the Bulls do decide to go after Ben Mathurin either now or in the future, I still like what he's able to bring. I still like the shot creation. I still like the fact he's able to get 15 to 17 points off the bench as a minimum, but he's not the perfect player, right? There are some things that do limit him and have caused some rightful concerns with you guys. There was somebody, in the comment section I was talking to, and they made a great point. It's like, well, hey, every year of Ben Mathurin's career, his team is technically, but despite the points that he scored, the team has been outscored while he's on the court, and that is a legitimate concern, right? Like, that is what you want to look at. Now, with a young player, you put them in a situation, you get them to a better, a culture, right? I can't say that we have a better culture than the Pacers, and maybe you can still mold that player into what you want to be with, but it just comes down to this for Ben Mathurin. It's probably not the right price, and so patience, you can wait out, and maybe you do get him or another player at a price that more suits you, and that's the biggest thing here for the Bulls. No matter what they see in their talent, no matter what they see, they should not do anything that is any semblance of an overpay for that specific player. Every player has their own level that feels like an overpay, right? But they shouldn't do anything that feels like an overpay for that player because they don't need to do that right now. So I think that's what you have to look at it. And there is also a huge chance that the Bulls keep that 15th roster spot open, right? An empty roster spot can be a weapon in the season. And here's why, right? The free agent market's drying up. And there are still some pretty big names out there that, could either be signed and traded or whatever else, in Peyton Watson and Jalen Duren. Now, I'm not saying that for the Bulls to acquire those guys. I'm saying that for the Bulls maybe to facilitate. For example, we've heard that the Cleveland Cavaliers have an interest in Peyton Watson, or even Jonathan Kuminga, right? But, both their teams in the Denver Nuggets and the Atlanta Hawks cannot take back another salary because they're both have too many roster spots. The Atlanta are over the number of roster spots, so they're going to have to cut somebody before the regular season starts. And so they don't have that or the cap restraints like the Denver Nuggets being in the second tax apron. So the Bulls could be in a position where they could take back Max Strus if the Cleveland Cavaliers want to facilitate a sign and trade for any player. And, we'd have to also send out a player to the other team for an expiring Isaac Okoro. But that open roster spot can become dangerous because of the flexibility it allows you financially, and that it allows you to help another team if you need be. And you can even take a player that, can fit into your mid-level exception. So that's what you go to. Keeping the 15th spot open, it allows you to facilitate trades, allows you to take on salary, allows you to help another team duck money, whether it's under the second tax apron. It helps you collect draft capital potentially doing that. Now, I will say that collecting draft capital for those type of things, we haven't seen a lot of those moves this offseason. So, and if you have, it's been seconds. So you're not going to probably get back to protected first like we gave out, for example, when we didn't, like in the DeMar DeRozan trade, because we didn't want to take back, Harrison Barnes and stuff like that. So, that's what you're looking at in regards to that. But, the Bulls have that. You want to stay flexible heading into the season. And Bryson Graham also could use that 15 roster spot to stay open and say, listen, if this team does exceed expectations, and Caleb Wilson is like that day one, Montes Buzelis hits a crazy leap. And by the All-Star break, by the trade deadline, I'm looking at this and saying, not only do I want to make a trade to kind of reconfigure this towards now where we are, but also those other things, taking more money back, all those type of stuff, it's there, right? And that aligns with Bryson Graham's willingness in all those areas that he's talked about. He's talked about the potential of taking back deals and lopsided trades. He's talked about stacking assets. He's talked about finding, other players to help this team. It really opens your door up to do a bit of everything, which is the flexibility that the Bulls need to be focused on right now. Then, of course, you can do the kind of more straight line forward things. You can add another veteran, right? This is a roster that still is lacking shooting desperately. You can go out there and get some shooting. And so I think right now the season is not about maximizing short-term wins. It's about developing young talent, establishing your identity, evaluating for long-term fit, keeping your future options open. Adding the wrong veteran during an evaluation period could clog the evaluation that you're trying to do of these young pieces, and that's what you want to stay away from, right? Adding the wrong restricted free agent can limit your flexibility now, and we talked about how the Bulls could have max-level cap space each of the next 2 offseasons. And that's even if they sign a max-level player, right? I'm not just saying, we can create max-level cap space, in the summer of 27, and then boom, we're done spending for a while. No, the Bulls can sign a max-level free agent in the summer of 27 and then turn around and sign another one in the summer of 28, depending on how they work some things out. And so that flexibility is important, especially going into year 3 of Montes Buzelis. In the next couple of off seasons, you'll be going into years 2 and 3 of Caleb Wilson. That flexibility is important for team building, and that's there. And when you contrast that against Acme, right, is that Acme was criticized for not keeping his options open, getting tunnel vision in regards to some things and some players. And Bryson Graham's approach appears at this point to be different than that. Like you look at the deals that Bryson did sign to veterans or trades, like it didn't limit long-term flexibility. That's something that I've talked about. If you guys watched this channel for a while, I always talked about how AK's deals is like, we didn't really like towards the end there. I do think he started maximizing flexibility a little bit more, but by then it was too late. You had too many years of an inflexible roster that by the time you got to your point of flexibility, you did what you did last year's trade deadline and completely blow up the team basically. So, it's a different approach in that, and it does take a little bit more patience. I get why Bulls fans want it, and they want it now, and you're not wrong for that. I want to be clear. You are not wrong for wanting your team to make these moves now, but it's going to take time. Fans very often want instant action and gratification. And when you have a franchise like the Chicago Bulls, that even more so, you look at how much more that they were missing in regards to the action that AK did not take in so long. Like, you got to look at that. And you have to understand, like, that's why, like, I would hope so. This is probably the most patient I've been with some wild fan takes probably in the summer ever, because I feel it. Like, I get it. I get why. We've been stressed out for a lack of competency so long. And then to have a front office that, that new front office that comes in, that preaches the competency, says all the right things, and then you start seeing some things like selling second-round picks, which reminds you of something that Acme did, right? You start seeing some of those things, and it puts you in a position where you're like, oh, damn, should I be getting antsy again? Should we be getting this? But calm down. Like, Bryson Graham is not Acme. And, while, I've said this before a lot of times too, Acme's thought process wasn't necessarily always the problem. It was the methodology and the execution of that. When you hear slap, right? it's not very much different from Arturas Karnisovas and the players that he described that he wanted. But he couldn't identify talent in the right way, and his execution of getting those guys was terrible, right? So, hopefully Bryson Graham is able to have a better vision, have a better execution of those things, and then we can hit the ground running and really, maybe this rebuild doesn't take as long. But we shall see what's going to happen in regards to that one. But I want to hear from you guys. How do you feel about the Bulls possibly going into the season with that 15th roster spot open? Let me know what you guys think on that down below. But then I want to talk about this next thing. And this is a one of those things that it's an off-season conversation. I want to be clear there, right? But on the recent episode of the Third Apron podcast, Sam Quinn suggested that the Orlando Magic should trade Paolo Banchero now to avoid a Jaylen Brown-like value slide, and that the Boston Celtics traded Brown for what seemed to be pennies on the dollar because they didn't want to have two guys taking up 70% of the cap. Now the Magic inch closer and closer to some painful second apron questions. Quinn thinks that they should trade Banchero, and if they do, the Bulls should be right there waiting. Okay, let's talk about this, right? The Orlando Magic, could they be in a situation where, like the Boston Celtics, because of how much money is eaten up by a few players on their roster, that they look to make a drastic trade? It's a possibility, right? I'm not going to say that it's completely impossible because this is the modern NBA. There would have been a lot of people sitting in this seat this time last year that probably would have said, there's no way that the Boston Celtics are going to trade Jaylen Brown. When he's carried the team, he's going to have to carry the team this upcoming season with, Jason Tatum and stuff like that. But then when you look at it, Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, over the next couple of years, they're gonna account for about 50 to 60% of the Orlando Magic's salary alone. Then you also look at the Jalen Suggs at $32 million, Desmond Bane at $39 million. He caps out at $44 million. They could be in a situation to where they do have to ask themselves a tough question. As it stands right now, they are $2 million below the second tax apron now. They're $39 million below the second tax apron next summer, but that's with so much of their roster: Nikola Vucevic, Isaac Okoro, Javon Carter, Jamal Cain, Goga Batazde, Anthony Black, who becomes a restricted free agent as well. Tristan Da Silva and Jace Richardson both have player options, which they're going to pick up on that. So, and so you quickly can see why this just continues to build. Now, I don't think they trade Paolo. Like, I get what's being said here and what Sam Quinn is alluding to. I don't think that they trade Paolo. If anything, maybe it's Franz, maybe it's Desmond Bane, right? And Desmond Bane, with him making $44 million in 28-29, maybe it's even Jalen Suggs. I know they just gave him that extension, but maybe it's even that so that they can keep Paolo and Franz together. So there's that part of it, right? But should the Bulls be waiting there for any of those players? Let's talk about that, right? If Paolo Banchero came available, he's 24 years old right now, a player that always looked like he was ready to make that next step, but that next leap has not come for him quite yet, right? It just has not come. Now, I'm not going to count him out. It's still come, but that next leap where you looked at a player that potentially goes into the star level conversation, Paolo has not reached that. Now, he's a damn good player, but I don't think he's reached that star conversation. And so, there's a part of that that's like, okay, would the Bulls be interested in that? He was 19th in the league in scoring, 17th in rebounding last year. He shot the ball 45% from the field, but he's a very limited player in the sense that, his three-point shot just has not improved. If anything, it's got worse. Since his second year in the league where he averaged 34% shooting, he averaged 32 and then 30 in the 2 years prior to that. And I think also the forward position is the Bulls' deepest position. We don't need that, right? Like, Caleb Wilson could very well be a more well-rounded player than Paolo Banchero when it's all said and done. And he could do that within the next 3 years. And so with the defense that Caleb Wilson has, with the fact that his three-point shot looks like it's more advanced than people gave him credit for, then you also have the Modest Buzelis part. Now, Modest, is he as good as Paolo? No. Is he on almost the same trajectory as Franz Wagner? Yes. I actually think yes. I think when you look at Franz and what Franz has done, and when you compare Franz's second season to Modest Buzelis' second season, you'll see those numbers aren't quite off of each other at all, right? They're not that far off. Now, Franz right now is a better player. I'm not saying that Modest has shown himself to be as good as Franz right now, but when you look at Franz, in his second year, he played all 80 games. He averaged 14 shots per game, 48% from the field, 36% from three, and he averaged 18 points, 4 rebounds, 3.5 assists, no blocks, 0.2, and 1 steal per game. That's not that far off from what Modest Buzelis. And when you think about the fact that Modest spent a large chunk of last season not being the number 1 or even the number 2 scoring option, you look at that and you're like, okay, like I've said this before. I've done a whole episode on it. Go and search the catalog where I compared Modest's second-year leap to Franz, Jalen Johnson, right? Other players like that even Pascal Siakam and what he did in his second year. Like, Modest is on a really good trajectory. You got to see how he's going to take that, in year 3, where Franz went from 18 points per game to 19.7, basically 20 points per game, and he's averaged 20 points per game since then, but his number of games has dropped each year since his second year too. So you don't want him on that trajectory. But so it becomes about, I don't think that Franz or Paolo necessarily makes sense. Their age isn't that far off from Modest Buzelis, so you have that part of it. What I'd be interested in, and especially if he gets back to being the shooter that he was before, if they have to shop Desmond Bane within the next couple of years. And I think a lot of people remember Desmond Bane for how rocky his season started off, and it did start off very rocky last season. And, there's just the reality of it. When you look at the month by month for Desmond Bane, in the month of October, he shot the ball 25% from 3. In the month of November, 34% from 3. He went from 16 points per game to 19 from October to November. Then in the month of December, he got back up to 38% shooting from 3. His points per game went up to 20. Then you look at the month of January. His 3-point shooting went back up to 40%, which is where you expect him at. And then February, 49% shooting from 3, and then 38%. So he got better and got back more to himself as he adjusted to being on a new team. Desmond Bane would be an interesting case. Now, his contract is stupid expensive. But let's say that in the next 2 off seasons, Norman Powell is gone, right? Like, Norman Powell's contract is up. We find our center of the future, whether that's Nick Claxton or another person. And then you're looking at the starting lineup and you're like, the thing that we have is a hole at shooting guard. Would you be interested in Desmond Bane if he gets back to the player that he's looked like before? At that point, he'd be 30 years old that we're talking about at that point. But the Magic could very well be facing a cap crunch at that point. And you may be willing to add more of an older player that's win now. Again, this is just a bunch of what ifs based off what Sam Quinn said. I don't think that Paolo fits. I don't think that Franz fits, especially if Modest or Caleb Wilson hits. Right now, if Modest doesn't hit and for some reason drops off, that then could change that conversation, right? But it's interesting to look at. And this is the type of thing that Bryson Graham needs to be watching out for. And I was in a conversation with somebody before, and they were like, well, are we talking about stuff too early? I'm like, for a front office, you can never be too early. You want to plan. You want to be ahead of the curve. So, if I'm Bryson Graham, I am looking around the league at some situations that, hey, what if this situation falls apart and this player becomes available? Is this somebody that we should be watching out for long-term, kind of seeing just tracking how things goes? I think you want to do a little bit of that across the teams in the league and identify certain players and say, hey, if this player becomes available at this price, we'd probably be willing to pay it. Let's monitor this. Let's see what happens. And if for some reason some rumblings and stuff starts coming out that player is now available, we'll be right there ready because we've done our due diligence, we've done our research, we've done our preparing, and we'll see. And I think that gets to me to kind of the last topic to talk about. Is Bryson Graham really building towards 2027, 2028 to make a swing? And I think that he's setting himself up for the possibility of doing that. It doesn't mean that right now Bryson is planning to make a big swing in 2027 or 2028, but it does mean that he could be, right? That he could set up himself to be in a position where you never know. LaMelo Ball came available where people didn't think LaMelo Ball was going to become available, right? So you've seen these deals happen across the league where a player's move that you just don't expect, and you want to possibly be in a situation like that. When you look at the summer of 2027, the Bulls can have $39 million in cap space. They can then create even more cap space with the options to Norman Powell, with the options to Zach Collins, with Trey Jones' option, right? Which can put you in an even bigger spot to do that. And so, I know people talk about the Jalen Duren if he takes the qualifying offer, the Peyton Watson if he takes the qualifying offer. But hell, what if it's a player that we don't even think is available right now that then does become available? That's what you have to put yourself in a position for, right? Is the flexibility there. And with the next 2 drafts, 2027 and 2028, not necessarily being looked at as being the deepest, you could have some flexibility where maybe you're willing to play with your draft picks a little bit more if you get that done. Again, I'm saying the big ifs right now. This is not something that I'm saying is for sure going to happen, but there are ifs. There are some situations to where, you keep your options open. Karl-Anthony Towns could be a free agent next offseason, right? You have that part of it. You can add a veteran in Paul George who played pretty good last season, to help supplement, not necessarily come in and to be your team, but help supplement development. You just never know. So be ready, be ye prepared. And I think that's where, again, when we get back to that word flexibility, That's what's going to matter so much for this next era of the Chicago Bulls, is not only having and how they created flexibility, but how then do you execute and use it? And that's the part that I'm excited to see what Bryson Graham does with it, because, and he could not, right? It could be, hey, we just don't have bad money. We're going to keep not signing bad money. And then that way we have flexibility for Monda's extension, Caleb Wilson's extension, maybe Josh Giddey's extension. And then we'll see where the chips fall, where they may at that point. There's a lot of that. And it just, we'll see, right? So overall, I'll say this. It's a lot of possibility coming up for the Bulls. And be prepared to hear the Chicago Bulls name in a lot of rumors over the next 12 to 18 months. You are going to hear a lot of rumors for the Chicago Bulls. Matter of fact, they may be in every rumor for any trade of a superstar between now and then to take on some bad money because of their open roster spot, because of their portion of their mid-level exception that they have left that they haven't used. All those things could shape up the Chicago Bulls to be in a lot of rumors. And my job here is to separate the rumors from the BS. So expect a lot of Facts or Caps episodes probably over the next year. And, we do it. We have fun with it. And that's what we do here. But that's going to do it for today's episode, man. Make sure you guys sound off down below if you're on the YouTube side. I want to hear how you feel about all of this in regards to the Bulls leaving the 15th roster spot open, the Orlando Magic possibly blowing up their roster at some point in time, all these type of things. Let me know what you guys think about that down below. Make sure you guys continue to follow us before we do that, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode or an upload. You can follow us at Bull Central Pod on every social media platform. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. And lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We're the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that is thanks to you, lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you ready if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of Breaks.